Hey everyone, it's Erin with Counter Read, joined by Brandon, also of Counter Read, and it's a Friday edition of our weekly video. However, next week we will actually be doing a midweek check-in and a post-game check-in. So I just said post-game, really strange, but regardless, we will have a midweek and a post-game check-in. So the schedule will change ever so slightly, but we thought, hey, it's bye week. Why not check in now? It's Friday the 13th. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing well. Particularly well for Friday the 13th, I guess. I saw that this morning and not particularly superstitious, but it's always interesting to have one and find out who is.
Yes, because the one thing that we can take from a Friday the 13th, if I am not mistaken, is it also a full moon or there's something about the moon position today that people also, I wouldn't know. It's dark and cloudy in Nebraska right now, but something about the moon placement people were also talking about if you were a teacher to basically be on the lookout because kids were going to be bouncing off the walls today. What I look at this as, if you are a football fan in particular, is I would just keep an eye on every single Friday night football game because it could get wild. So, what do we have on the docket for Friday? I mean, that's where we
Tula-
can.
Tulane at Memphis, which should be pretty good.
Ooh,
Colorado,
I was going to
yeah,
say
good.
Fresno State at Utah State, but you were about to say the big one that could get real wonky.
Yeah, Stanford at Colorado. I wrote a little bit about this on Tuesday, I believe, or for Tuesday of this week, looking back at year one coaches. Colorado's sitting there at 4-2. Is that correct? Yeah, 4-2. So they've got 6 games remaining. It's not a guarantee, I don't think, that Colorado gets to 6 wins. And if they lose tonight, then it gets really tough because they've still got to play. I don't remember their schedule off the top of my head. Anyway, look at their schedule, eyeball it a little bit, and Stanford's shown a little bit lately. It's Colorado should win that game, but for a full moon, weird moon that we don't know how it's weird yet. Um, that's the one I would be keeping an eye on as the one that like yeah, things could get interesting.
It is also a 9 p.m. central kick. So, in the iteration of what the Pac 12 is right now, Pac 12 after dark typically doesn't disappoint. So, enjoy it while we can because that will be looking very different soon. But obviously, we have a lot of people who are watching this channel because you care about Nebraska football, you care about Nebraska athletics, and Nebraska football is on a bye week. Now, if you are somebody who's like, I need my Nebraska athletics fix, I hope you are prepared to watch some volleyball this weekend. Nebraska welcomes both Michigan State and a pretty highly ranked Penn State team to Lincoln. Michigan State's Friday night. Penn State is Saturday night. I am excited to see that Penn State matchup. The Michigan State one is too because Nebraska was tested against Michigan and Michigan State, both of those teams last weekend. So hopefully it's not deja vu for the Huskers. But if you are somebody who's like, I just need something Nebraska to watch, don't you worry. There's plenty on the schedule there too with volleyball, and I believe if those aren't on, uh, usually they're on BTN. I'd have to go double check, but I would say definitely the Penn State one is regardless. But all right, let's talk about some football things quick. One thing that we will get to is the story that Brandon, you wrote for Friday, October 13th on picks for week 7 and also about the best coaches once Big Ten play begins. But before we jump into that, let's talk really quick about the Q&A that came out yesterday with athletic director Trev Alberts. For those of you who aren't familiar with Counter Read, please head to counterread.com. This was actually a really unique opportunity because I sat down with Trev Alberts to talk to him for a few different stories that I have on my radar or am working on right now, but also pitched the idea of would you take some questions from Counter Read subscribers? And he is an open book. So he's like, absolutely. What do they want to know? And we had about 5 questions that he goes into detail on. He doesn't really hold back on answers. If you ask him, he's going to tell you where he's at. And I'm glad that so many people were excited to see that. You know, it is a cool perk for our subscribers that they were able to sort of have that direct line to the athletic director to ask those questions. And the plan is to do that again. So head to counterread.com, become a subscriber, because these are the things that we hope to continue to do. And I think that was a pretty good starting point where people are like, oh, he is going to answer these questions. Let's make sure we ask some.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're a little over, we're not quite 2 months into this new venture that is Counter Read, and this was definitely one of our posts that got the most attention. So, good job, Erin. And I mean, there was a lot of interesting stuff in there. Of course, stadium and like the renovations and just the disruption that is going to be come along with any sort of renovations is still top of people's mind. The part that piqued my interest the most, perhaps, was Alberts talking about rebuilds in this current era of college football. Speaking of Colorado Stanford tonight, or for Friday night, we got a kind of one-to-one comparison, and I wrote about a little bit about that going into that game, of how it was such a contrast of Colorado took things all the way to the extreme, and Deion Sanders, to his credit, said he was going to do that the day that he showed up. Nebraska, it took some transfers, but it's kind of the fast versus slow approach, and I thought Alberts had a really good answer on that, and it's one that's going to keep coming up as we just continue on in a transfer era in college football.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I appreciate about anytime I have a chance to talk with Trev Alberts is his attention to the detail of the questions and the answers that he provides, because in that case he was really intentional, where he did not want people to think he was trying to make some Colorado Nebraska comparison, because he's like, what will work in this new world of college football in one state at one school is not necessarily going to work at another state at another school. It's going to be very dependent on who you are, your location. Being Nebraska in the middle of the country, being the only Division I football program is a very different experience than, say, an Alabama or a USC or somebody else who is in a very different position. So he was clear on that, and I think having that detail to, at Nebraska, we really can't go all in one way or the other, where we're only taking walk-ons, because you have to have that. I liked how he said it, of like, yeah, we have a lot of the Nebraska Midwest homegrown kids, but then we also have to go out and get the Tommy Frazier difference makers who are coming to Nebraska from wherever they might be in the country, so that we can also balance that. So that's Nebraska's reality of, you're trying to build a foundation with what you have locally, but also looking in the portal and being strategic. And, there's some areas where I'm sure Matt Rule, now midway through the season, is like, I should have probably looked a little bit harder at this particular position in the portal. And the time that he was away from college ball while he was at Carolina, things really changed. So I will actually be curious to see how Matt Rule approaches the portal in year 2 of this whole kind of quote unquote rebuild, because he now has a better understanding of, one, what he has, but two, what it looks like and what you need to do. So I appreciated kind of that perspective, where he's like, what Trev Alberts said I really wanted from Matt Rule was a foundation to build from, but we still have to be realistic about the current landscape of the portal and NIL. And then he gave some really good detail on that. The other parts for me that, he talks about things like why Nebraska doesn't have, selling alcohol in the stadium as a top of the list thing. And same thing with why Nebraska hasn't looked at potentially adding another sport or a couple of sports. And a lot of times we simply look at, oh, it's because of this, or it's that, or it's politics, or, in the case of adding sports, it's simply just Title IX. But it's not that simple for Nebraska. There's a million things that are going into the reasons for why they do or don't do something, but also sometimes they're very simple answers. And so in the case of, the alcohol piece, just to hear him go, we just don't have the infrastructure. So like, I can't do that, because it would be nearly impossible for us to provide any kind of, experience to people. without them being frustrated and angry and everything else. And so when you think about what they're going to do with the new stadium and the updates, is they're going to try to facilitate a better a better consumer experience, which then maybe we start to have that conversation of alcohol sales in Memorial Stadium, because you're talking about being able to put better point of sales in, you're being able to talk about more efficient Wi-Fi in the stadium. But those are all things that have to happen. It's not as simple as just like rolling the Bud Light card in and going, all right, here we go. Unless we want a complete similar to what happened in Ireland, where everyone's just getting free beer, which, I mean, that would be one way to really truly make some new fans, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I growing up in Western Nebraska, I went to a lot of brandings, and all you need is a horse tank and a lot of ice. In my experience now, um, I really enjoyed that about the Q&A. He offered really specific answers on both of those things, and and those are topics that have come up that have been floating around for a while, like will Nebraska ever add another sport? What about alcohol sales in Memorial Stadium? They're just kind of things that float out there. And Alberts gave two really, like, I understand the kind of conversation, but like, here are two reasons that we can't do that tomorrow. So I would encourage everyone to go to Counter Read and check out that Q&A, because it kind of clears up the conversation. Not definitively, but it tells you, like, it gives you a sense of the things that somebody in his position has to consider. So it is a post for subscribers, and we would love it if you became one. But if you're not ready to jump in feet first, or head first, I guess, you can do a 7-day free trial as well. So check that out.
Yes, and if anyone hears a huffing and puffing dog in the background of me, it's Scout is a true pandemic dog and has learned over the years, by being home so much, the sounds of FedEx and UPS and everything else. And even if they're not coming to our house, she now recognizes the sounds. I could edit that out, but I'm just not going to, because this is the reality of a bye week. We didn't even get anything delivered to us, so we just barked for nothing. But let's switch to picks for week 7. I really enjoyed your piece on the best coaches once Big Ten play begins, mostly because I didn't even realize that Penn State still isn't done with its non-conference schedule. It always seems so bizarre to me when we get to this point in October or late in the year. And I know Alabama is known for doing this, where they have the late season non-conference matchups, but it still feels like we should be past that and fully into conference play. So, there's little things like that even when I'm reading these things, that for some reason I'm like, why didn't I realize that? But I will just give you the floor really quick to speak about this, and then we can dive into a little bit more specifics, because with your week 7 picks, we can also talk about, well, of course, what to watch this weekend.
Yeah, so it is a bit of a rarity in the Big Ten to have. Well, you might have one non-conference game like this late, but it's not like the SEC, where they have SoCon Saturday in October or November, where it seems like most of the conference teams are not playing a conference game. And it's a bye week for Nebraska, and Line Items, a post or a newsletter that comes out every Friday, is a look at the point spreads. I make picks for all the Big Ten games. I have previously termed them anti-picks, because if you're really, really good at sports betting, yeah, you can like make some money doing that. I personally am not somebody who's willing to put in the work. And go check out the Line Items from the very first one we did. I wrote all about that. Like, so it's very much for entertainment purposes only. I like to make picks. I like to think about games. And I do think that the point spread, which is market data that with kind of the rise of sports gambling has become, I think, even more valuable and bigger. Like, it's just, it's a law of large numbers type of thing. The markets are including a lot of people legally now. So uh, the lines are getting pretty tough to beat. But using that, so this week's post is an example of how I kind of use some of that data. And I look at the Big Ten season itself as kind of different from everything that comes before it. it's just tough. Like the defenses are tough, the weather can be tough. Like teams play a ton of close games. So I kind of went in wondering, hey, which coaches are the best at this? And to do that, I looked at their against the spread records, both in all games versus conference games, which kind of shows you. And no surprises really at the top. Well, at the very top, Jim Harbaugh right now is at 60% against the spread, which is really, really good. Anything over 55% against the spread would be good. And yeah, we can look at Michigan's record and they're like, yeah, no kidding, he's doing well. But what the reason you go for this is the line on these games makes it pretty close to about 50-50 for every game. So if you're covering a bunch, that means not only are you winning, you're basically exceeding expectations. And the opposite can be true if you're not. And in the case of Maryland, who's having a really good year right now, and I think is a really good team. Um, uh, Watching the Ohio State Maryland game last week, I think they flashed like Maryland has never beaten a Big Ten team that's been ranked since it joined the Big Ten. And it was kind of like, and then you look at his against the spread record, out of conference versus in conference, and yeah, it kind of tells the story. Like you can get Maryland to a pretty good spot. Uh, it's tough to climb over those top 3 or 4 teams in the East, and it's only going to get tougher as the Big Ten adds 4 new teams. So uh, we only have 3 games to go with for Matt Rule, but we know what his record was prior to that in conference games, and you can read all about that where he falls in that group. Um, See what you can see. There's no hard and fast conclusions offered. It's just kind of a let's poke around with this data a little bit and see what theories we can develop.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I will say the one part of today's, and based on when you're watching this, Friday's newsletter, which is always available, by the way, at counterread.com. If you're somebody who hasn't yet signed up, but you want to go read some of the free pieces that are available, just head to counterread.com. Everything is right there on the page to sort through and look at. But I did audibly laugh out loud when I read the word gross under Indiana at Michigan. So that is a really good transition into what games are you watching this weekend? Because when you have a bye weekend, I'm sure for those of you watching, you have your weekends planned to do whatever it is that you're going to do, because that's how bye weekends go, is you use them to go to the pumpkin patch or whatever fall activity that you feel like doing. But that's what happens on a bye weekend. But there's still plenty of football to watch. I don't know if, based on the gross reaction, how inspired I am to watch Indiana at Michigan. But I have other games that I'm interested in. But what about you?
Yeah, the Big Ten slate is not the most. It doesn't have the most curb appeal. Minus one game, which I'm guessing will come up when we talk about the afternoon slot. So I'll check in on Indiana, Michigan, even though I called it gross. Like
Mhm.
Indiana was a 17-point favorite over Nebraska on the road, 19 points over Minnesota. It's 33.5-point favorite over Indiana at home. So not going to be a lot to see there. Ohio State, Purdue, another big line. So for the morning, I think the game that I'm actually most interested in is comes from the Big 12. I'm pretty interested to see Iowa State at Cincinnati. There's been a lot of kind of online chatter about, oh, maybe Matt Campbell like missed his moment. He was the guy who was named for every head coach opening for a couple of years, and then in Iowa State's kind of slunk back a little bit. They've kind of rebounded since the loss to Ohio, and Cincinnati first year head coach Scott Satterfield was somebody I wrote about on Tuesday alongside Matt Rule and all the others in his coaching class, so to speak. So that's the one I've got my eye on. How about you for the morning session?
That was the one I picked. I mean, I think you kind of have to go because that morning slate is rough. I'm going to be honest with you. In fact, trying to decide between, this is the last weekend of the farmers market in the Omaha area, at least the specific one that I like to go to, and they do the old market on I'm all off on my days. The old market on Saturday, the Exarban area on Sunday. that if you're not from Nebraska, all you need to know is that Exarban is Nebraska spelled backwards. But I was trying to think of like which one to go to and when, and I'm thinking Saturday morning might make the most sense because the slate looks that rough. Now that Iowa State Cincinnati game is at 11 a.m. Central on FS1. Yes, sorry, my brain looked at the Rutgers line. It's right above it. That could actually be a fairly interesting game. I guess Rutgers, Michigan State, if you were going to take a Big Ten game in the morning slot. But it's long story short, we do try in our newsletter to pick different games that we have our eyes on. This is one where I'm sorry, there's just really not much in that morning slate. I do feel like I know what you're going to pick for the afternoon game. So if it is okay, so the way that like you can't see Brandon's facial response, like facial reaction response to me, so now I feel pretty safe taking Oregon Washington. That is at 2:30 p.m. Central on ABC. I am particularly interested in this just because I am finding a lot of sort of the departing Pac-12, especially for the teams that are staying. So like Washington State and Oregon State have been particularly interesting. This one's fascinating to me because these are two future Big Ten teams, and they're both 5-0. Washington is ranked seventh. Oregon is ranked eighth. It's a big deal. Somebody's walking out of this with their first loss of the season. So I will be particularly interested in that matchup. And there's a reason game day is going there. It's a big one. So I took the obvious choice, but I had to.
Yeah, since it's the biggest game of the weekend, I think the Big Ten should just go ahead and say this is a Big Ten game. You're like, yeah, two Big Ten teams. Here we go. Not and not just like the Pac-12 is having, sadly, if you stop and think about it for a second, a really like strong year. It's as good as it's been in quite a while. Not just a good game between two top 10 opponents. The first time, Oregon and Washington played a bunch of games. The first time they've both been ranked in the top 10. So kind of fun there. These offenses both average about 50 points a game too. So and they always they tend to play close. This one's a blockbuster. In our neck of the woods, so to speak, in terms of like deriving some value for future Nebraska games, if you want to do a little advanced scouting, like the best Big Ten game of the weekend, and I don't mean aesthetically, I mean in terms of importance, perhaps, is Iowa at Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Badgers -10, which Iowa just has a. You gotta tip your hat to the Hawkeyes. Like they just find a way to stay in games and win games. And it was pretty easy last week. Purdue was coming off a big win at Illinois. Iowa had just lost its quarterback for the season, and it's not like the offense was going gangbusters. It went even worse. Well, the run game found some ways to make it work, but at quarterback, the passing game, awful. Didn't matter. Iowa still found a way to win. So I'll be real interested in this one. From Nebraska's perspective, they're 1-2 in conference play, not out of the Big Ten West race by any means, just because it's so hard to like the West isn't presenting itself as a open and shut case for Wisconsin, though it gets a little bit closer to that if the Badgers go to 3-0 by beating Iowa. So a lot of interesting angles to that one.
Yes, and that one, if you already said this, I apologize, but it is at 3 p.m. Central on Fox. For the evening games, there's like honestly three that I was like seriously like having a hard time picking between. I think the obvious pick, I don't even want to say obvious, but I think I'm personally very intrigued in the USC Notre Dame game. That's number 10 USC versus number 21 Notre Dame, 6:30 p.m. Central on NBC. But the game that I would actually say I would take even just a little bit more over that, and I don't think it's like I think it's really there's three games in that slot, and they're scheduled between Fox, NBC, and ABC. So you have the USC Notre Dame, UCLA, Oregon State, but the one that I'm really probably the most interested in is number 25 Miami at number 12 North Carolina, 6:30 p.m. Central on ABC. I am interested in that one because North Carolina is 5-0, Miami's 4-1. The whole situation with Miami last weekend, I don't know how to even really talk about that. So North Carolina is a 3-point favorite. I really am kind of enjoying watching UNC just roll through the season a little bit. So yeah, that's the one I probably am taking. But I honestly, there's quite a few games that you could just roll. I mean, even the Boise State, Colorado State later in the like real late at 8:45 p.m. Central, that looks interesting too. So I don't know. You could pick like a handful of these and like you've got a pretty good lineup for the evening games.
Yeah, and I think the one, knowing that USC Notre Dame, I think, is probably the headliner. And you mentioned UCLA Oregon State, which I think will be a really good football game to watch. The one I highlighted and will probably turn to first. Well, it starts earlier than USC Notre Dame does, I think. That helps. But I'm interested in Auburn LSU.
Okay.
LSU can put up a ton of points. Really got everything it could handle from Missouri last week until a late barrage of points. And Auburn, we saw them a couple of weeks ago, kind of put a scare in Georgia. This one's on the road. They got to go to Death Valley and try and do that. But I'll be intrigued if that one stays close. I'll probably stick with that one because I do think Auburn has a little bit of a shot there. And the kind of off the radar hipster pick that I have made like 3 times in this slot, so I didn't choose to do it a 4th time. But Wyoming's on in prime time again, playing a really good Air Force team. Air Force has one of the best offenses in the country. That's always a pretty good game, pretty good under the radar game. I believe it's on CBS Sports Network. So probably keep an eye on that one too, because watching Air Force, if you haven't watched Air Force yet this year, obviously we know they run, kind of a flex bone option, but they do that when they're not good. But when they are good, it's a ton of fun to watch. So Air Force, if they get this win, might have the inside track for kind of the G5 playoff bowl bids. We're not going to make the playoff, but in terms of the G5 representative, they've got a shot to be the highest ranked by the time those final college football playoff rankings come out.
I will say if you're doing the screen divider, if you have YouTube TV, they do it for you, which is super nice. But if there's one more that you're looking for, because I did discover the feature where you can actually now tell it which one, like which lineup you want, which is really nice. Unless I was a little bit frustrated last week. They were showing the ESPN2 version of the Red River rivalry, and I just really wanted to watch the ABC version. But I got the ESPN2 Pat McAfee version, and they show more of the sideline than the game. So besides that, you can't really completely fix it around. But if you do to get the SEC network, I actually do think that Missouri Kentucky game could be a interesting one as well. Both teams are 5-1. Kentucky is a 2.5-point favorite. Kentucky is 24th. I think Missouri is probably just on the outside of the top 25. Could be a pretty interesting SEC matchup too, if none of the other ones intrigue you, or if you're looking for that 4 slot. Long story short, it's a bye week for Nebraska, but there's a good amount of stuff to, 1, get caught up on, 2, watch other teams. There's still volleyball. There's also, I'd have to look at the schedule, but I'm sure there might be soccer. There's plenty going on in the world of Nebraska athletics, even without football. But yeah, we'll be back next week with more of a more quote unquote normal schedule for Counter Read in season. So if you haven't subscribed, head over to counterread.com, get yourself subscribed. Even if it's just a free subscription, it goes a long way. We'd like to earn your trust. But thank you for watching these videos and tuning in. We're going to do a midweek video next week. So if you have questions, comments, things you want us to talk about specifically heading up into Nebraska's matchup with Northwestern, be sure to leave those comments below. Brandon, thank you for your time. Enjoy your Friday the 13th.
I will enjoy my Friday the 13th. Enjoy your bye week, the farmers market whenever it happens.
Whenever it happens. I am also seeing Taylor Swift the Eras Tour in theaters. So thank goodness for bye weeks, everyone. Enjoy it however you spend it. We'll talk to you later.